Welcome, everybody, back to week 3 of the Curt Mallory press conference here on GoSycamores.com, as well as the Indiana State Facebook page. Indiana State is coming off a loss to Louisville over the weekend. They will now head into a rivalry with Eastern Illinois. It will be this Saturday night. Locally here in Terre Haute, it will kick off at 7 o'clock. Over in Charleston, Illinois, it will be a 6 o'clock Central kickoff time. Indiana State has lost 6 in a row to Eastern Illinois. It is back-to-back years playing the Panthers for the first time since the late 2000s. Coach, we'll open it up to you just with an opening statement on the loss to Louisville, which was a wacky game day experience for you guys down in Louisville, Kentucky, and just kind of briefly describing the challenge you'll have this week with Eastern.
Sure. Going into Louisville, obviously, our main emphasis was to get better from week 1 to week 2. If we do that, we felt like we could play with Louisville. We did that, probably 3 quarters. Had our opportunities. They had their just as many opportunities. They took advantage of those opportunities. At the end, we didn't. They came up on top with a victory. Of course, the elements. It was what it was, and I thought our young men handled it the right way, stayed focused, came out each time, ready to play, and give ourselves credit with that. It's on to a new week, a big week. As you mentioned, we haven't won at all in the last 6 appearances, so this will be a big week, getting better from week 2 to week 3.
Before we really focus on the game against Eastern on Saturday, I do want to touch up on what you thought of your team's effort at Louisville, specifically in responding to each of the delays. I think it was pretty clear that your guys were ready to go. Every delay that happened, you came right back out. Your guys had a lot of energy through the warm-ups, and then when you actually had to play, there was a ton of energy out there on the field. It didn't seem like you were struggling. You preach all the time to your guys, whether it's the weather, whether it's you show up to the hotel and your room key doesn't work, deal with it. That's really kind of what you say to build that toughness with your group. Do you feel that this is a group that's really starting to buy into that philosophy, and regardless of what's thrown at them, whether it is 3 lightning delays, whether it is the pouring rain, they're going to be ready to go and they're going to give it their best shot?
Well, there's no question. I think we talked about it all week long that there's a good chance that we could have bad weather. We talked to certain teams that had gone through it the prior week, prepared our kids. Our kids prepared. Told them you got to be able to control what you can control. I thought they did a tremendous job of doing so. When we came in during the delay, heck, they had energy, and we had to kind of control it, to be honest with you. So we weren't too hyped up, but they stayed loose. They stayed focused. They were counting down the minutes when I told them it was 30, and when they came back out, you could see they were ready to go.
What did you guys do during that time? You mentioned how you may have had to try to control the hype a little bit with your guys, but I know talking to Craig last week too, I know he had conversations, Craig Smith, the director of football operations, with South Dakota State, and really talked to them about what were some things they would handle their situation differently when they were at Iowa State. How did you guys handle that situation with your guys, knowing you had 3 times you had to go into that locker room, and why it was a positive experience and your guys were able to come out each time? It seemed like on the positive end.
I think every team's different. Every personality of every team is different. I like our team's personality. They're starting to gain some confidence. They came in. We went into the game. Told them, don't be surprised when you play with these guys. Don't be surprised when you have success against Louisville. It's going to happen. We've got good players. We'll be able to play with them. And when they came in at halftime, not to say they didn't believe us that they were going to have success, but you could tell it was a confidence. It was an air about this team that, hey, we really can. And I know a majority of them felt that going in. But I know the team as a whole, when we were in the locker room, was a very confident football team.
Of course, with the weather the way it was, I know running the football was going to be important. But being able to capitalize off of Louisville's mistakes, you think of Jonas being able to get that interception, it gets you into the red zone. And still this year, every time you've been able to get into the red zone, you've been able to get a touchdown out of it. How important was that sequence for your group to install that belief, as you mentioned, of going into halftime, where before a lot of your guys, I think, did believe that you guys could compete with them and play with them. But that really was the moment I think everybody in the stadium went, wow, this team does believe that they can win this game. Just the importance of being able to finish a drive and being able to capitalize against an opponent such as Louisville.
There's no question. I think there was some real positives, one being the interception, and then our offense capitalizing, going down in there for a touchdown. Coming out of the Quincy game, we felt we left a lot of plays out there. Coming out of Louisville, we feel like we had still left some plays out there, some things we could have capitalized on. We had some opportunities throughout the game that we're going to have to get cleared up, but we've minimized that a little bit, especially as you look as we got into about 3 minutes left in the third quarter. We really started to not capitalize on some of the mistakes we were making. We had 2 punt returns that were very costly. Give them credit. They did a good job blocking. They did a good job splitting us, and you can't do that against a good team like that.
I know afterwards, I think you cleared it up in the post-game press conference. I'll ask it to you here again this week. I know Jaleel left the game for momentarily, did come back in. Ryan Boyle got some snaps too in the game of Louisville. I know Travis Reiner, you put in Lucas there to get a couple of punts. Just overall, how did you get out of the game health-wise, and where you stand this week early?
I was pleased with the way we came out health-wise. The kids played hard. It was a physical game. They felt it Sunday morning when they woke up. We minimized what we did yesterday because of the travel, which is fine. We'll get back at it a little bit in the weight room today, and get back after tomorrow. But pleased with the way we came out of it. We had some bumps and bruises, but for the most part, we came out of it pretty clean.
You, of course, know the game is going to be one of a physical nature, as you mentioned, when you go into those environments. How did you feel your offensive and defensive lines in terms of matching Louisville's physicality up front did in that game? Because it really seemed throughout. I know later in the game when Malik Cunningham got in, that's when the Louisville offense really started to turn a little bit. But it seemed like for the most part, there were a lot of running lanes that your offensive line was able to open up, and the physicality part, it didn't seem as much as a big of a mismatch as what you would maybe think going into one of those Monday games.
No, the physicality part of it, I don't think was as much a concern. I think, we were able to sustain some blocks, stay on blocks, but there were some steps, some technical part of it that we got to get cleaned up. But the physicality part of being able to match up physically wasn't, when you watch the film, as much of a concern as it was just our technique on both sides. If we're having to angle in our defensive line to get to the next gap over, getting lower in our angle, playing too high at times in the defensive line, those are all correctable deals. Working together on combo blocks on the offense, those things are all correctable. But just the one-on-one matchups, physicality wasn't as concerning.
Now let's look towards this week in Eastern. Last year it was the renewal of a rivalry. First time playing the game since 2009. This is an important game to play, just in terms of course, how close these two schools are. I don't want you to necessarily rehash of the importance of playing this game, but knowing how last year so close to really pulling off that win, Eastern scoring late to win. You said in your opening statement, this is a big week. Why is this a big week for your football team? And not necessarily it's who the opponent you're playing is, but just the importance to try to build off of what you just did this past weekend in Louisville.
Well, I think a lot of reasons. Obviously, proximity, as you mentioned before. Two teams coming from playing each other from two very good conferences with the Ohio Valley and the Missouri Valley. It's a good matchup. It's a good matchup for both teams because it'll give us confidence, both teams, as we move into our conference. And so there's a history between the two schools. There's been some great games, and this is no different. We had a great game against them last year. It was a great environment at Memorial Stadium, and it'll be a great environment at their place come Saturday night.
I asked you talked about consistency. That was the biggest thing you wanted to see your team grow from week 1 to week 2. Now as you kind of settle in here in week 3, where do you want to see your team grow the most in terms of going from week 2 to week 3 against an opponent that will match what you'll see in conference play very, very soon?
No question. We got to keep taking that upward trajectory. We've been able to do that the last 2 weeks. We're 1-1 right now. But again, I'm going to say it every week. We've got to get better every week from week 2 to week 3. And this is a very good football team that we're about to face. But we've got to get better. We've got to get some things improved this week as we did last week. Felt good that we did some of the things, correct some of the things, made the right improvement, and this week will be no different.
I know Illinois State was able to put up some points. Arkansas, of course, just because of their nature being an SEC team, kind of a similar situation we went through with Louisville over the past weekend. Eastern has been known to have some really good defenses, and last year's game was kind of a defensive slugfest back and forth. I know they had a pick 6 in the game a year ago and really jump-started some of their scoring. I know their defensive numbers are nowhere near that staff probably wants them to be, but despite maybe some teams able to move the ball against Eastern this year, when you've watched them on film, I know you've only watched them briefly at this point early in the week, what has stood out about their defense, even when maybe their numbers may not be necessarily great, there's still a lot of returners that come back from a defensive group a year ago that was consistent.
They played really good defense last year. Of course, we studied them throughout the summer. They've picked up where they left off and have improved, which is no surprise. Head football coach is a defensive-minded coach. It carries over. They do a great job, but they do a great job on all 3 phases. They're a very well-coached football team. We'll have our hands full come Saturday night.
And finally, flipping over for offensively, last year was kind of Mitch Kimball running the show, at least for us in week 1 before he got into some injury issues and they mixed it up. I know they brought in some transfers. Right now they're going through a 2-quarterback system. Just the challenges that presents to you guys as a staff. You kind of know you're going to see both. And just what you guys do as a staff to prepare your team to see both from a defensive standpoint, because I know you've been a defensive guy for a long time and have had the game plan against teams with multiple quarterbacks.
Well, I think it always starts up front, too. Watching them against Arkansas last week, I saw them early. They're physical up front. They're big. Got a good running back. They're going to run the ball downhill. Got 2 quarterbacks that are very capable. They returned some wide receivers for me a year ago. So we're going to, again, as you look at them, you defend them, it's always going to start up front. And they're big, they're physical. They got 2 capable quarterbacks, but they're very balanced. So we'll get to work tomorrow and get after these guys.
Coach, appreciate the time. Good luck against the Panthers, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Okay, thank you very much.